As the sun began to set, Regina sat in her living room, staring out of the window at the darkening streets below. She had been feeling uneasy all day, ever since she received a mysterious package containing an antique mirror. The mirror was said to have belonged to her grandmother, who had always warned her about its dangerous powers. Regina knew that she should return the mirror to its box and forget about it, but something about it called to her. She couldn't resist taking a glance into its depths. As she gazed into the mirror, she saw nothing at first, but then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught sight of a figure lurking in the shadows outside. Her heart began to race as she realized that something was watching her from beyond the glass. She tried to turn away, but it was too late. The mirror had already taken hold of her, drawing her into its dark world. Regina found herself transported to a place where everything was twisted and wrong. Buildings towered over her like monsters, their shadows stretching out to engulf her in darkness. She could hear the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty streets, getting closer and closer until they became the pounding of her own heart. As she ran, trying to escape whatever was chasing her, Regina heard a voice whisper her name. It was a voice that seemed to come from inside her head, but also all around her at once. She knew that it belonged to the mirror itself and that it was using her fears against her. Regina tried to fight back, screaming for help as she ran, but no one appeared, and soon she found herself alone in a desolate world where everything seemed to be made of darkness. The figure from before was nowhere to be seen, but Regina knew that it was still out there, waiting for her. As the minutes ticked by, Regina's fear turned to panic. She had no idea how she would ever escape this nightmare, trapped as she was in the mirror's twisted world. All she could do was run and hope that someone would find her before it was too late. Just as Regina was about to lose all hope, a voice called out to her from the darkness. "Regina, is that you?" It was her neighbor, Mrs. Jackson. "Oh, thank God, Mrs. Jackson! I need your help!" Regina shouted, relieved to hear a familiar voice. "What's going on, dear?" Mrs. Jackson asked, clearly worried. "It's the mirror. It took me to this place and I can't get out," Regina explained, out of breath from all the running. "The mirror?" Mrs. Jackson repeated, confused. "Yes, the one that belonged to my grandmother. It has some sort of power," Regina said, trying to catch her breath. "All right, let's get you out of here," Mrs. Jackson said, determined. Together they ran through the twisted world, trying to find a way out. "There's the mirror!" Regina exclaimed, pointing to it in the distance. Mrs. Jackson nodded and headed towards it. As they got closer, the figure from before appeared, blocking their way. "Don't be afraid, Regina. You have the power to banish it back to where it came from," Mrs. Jackson encouraged her. Regina closed her eyes and took a deep breath, then mustered up all her courage. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, return from whence you came, that's all," she recited, feeling a surge of power. With a blinding flash, the mirror shattered into pieces and the darkness lifted. Regina found herself back in her living room, panting and sweating. "Are you okay, dear?" Mrs. Jackson asked, concerned. I think so," Regina said, still trying to process what had just happened. "Thank you so much. I couldn't have done it without you," she added, grateful for her neighbor's help. "Of course, Regina. That's what neighbors are for," Mrs. Jackson said, smiling kindly. Regina knew that she would never forget this experience, but she was also relieved that it was finally over. She made a mental note to never underestimate the power of an antique mirror again,